Oklahoma is the land of second, third, and last chances. Who were the people that made it so? The Red River Institute of History, johnjdwyer.com, me, Gwen Falconer Lippert, and our signature sponsor, Atwood's Stores, present Oklahoma Gold. Together with our Will Rogers Medallion-winning author-historian John J. Dwyer, we'll stitch the golden threads of Oklahoma history. It's Oklahoma Gold. Dignifying our history when we learn about the names we've seen. John J. Dwyer, what's this story?
Well, it's the larger-than-life biography of the good and great Chalres Colcord, which reads like a half-century chronicle of territorial and early statehood Oklahoma, or at least most of its dramatic events. Born before the war between the states and living nearly until World War II, this iron-willed Westerner and consummate man of action helped blaze the Chisholm Trail, partnered to build one of the greatest cattle dynasties of 19th century America, rode in 3 Oklahoma land runs, proved himself one of the greatest lawmen of the Old West, served as the first police chief of Oklahoma City, the first sheriff of Oklahoma County, and a frontier U.S. Marshal, and built many of OKC's first-generation businesses, as well as its first skyscraper, the familiar Colcord Building, which still thrives over a century later. Yes, that Chalres Colcord. This one man did all that, and much more. But let's go back to the beginning. 12-year-old Charlie Colcord's father, William, a Confederate Civil War colonel from Kentucky, moved the boy from the New Orleans area to Texas to preserve his malaria-stricken life. The move proved a good one, as Charlie was droving cattle up the Chisholm by the time he was 14. The daring, headstrong youth ran away from home at one point to cowboy on his own, then returned to tell his father about the need for horses in Kansas and the grazing lands open for rental from the Cherokees in the Cherokee Outlet. The elder Colcord moved his operation north and formed the Jug Cattle Company in northern Indian Territory in southern Kansas, with teenage Charlie the range boss. For a while, the Colcords lived in an earthen dugout. Then, from the late 1870s through the mid-1880s, William, Charlie, and some of their neighbors proceeded to build one of the greatest cattle kingdoms in history, the Comanche Pool. They did so largely on reservation and other lands they leased from the natives, which channeled enormous amounts of American dollars into tribal coffers. The Colcords battled brutal weather, including colossal open-range blizzards, harsh terrain, wild animals, and periodically violent Indians. They cooperated with their colleagues in the Comanche Pool for common defense and shared resources. At its peak in the mid-1880s, the Comanche Pool ran more than 80,000 cattle. Roundup time covered over 3 million acres that stretched across central and western Kansas, the length of western Indian Territory south the Red River, and west to the Texas-New Mexico border. The cattlemen served customers as varied as New York City restaurants and the Western Indian Territory reservations, now hosting thousands of natives. In 1885, the federal government broke up the Comanche Pool and others to hasten the way for American settlement of the native lands. The same year, Colcord married Harriet Scoresby, the daughter of an English-born Methodist Episcopal minister. As he recorded in his memorable The Autobiography of Charles Francis Colcord, 1859 to 1934, Charles pursued his own path for this, as with so many other things in his life. Quoting him now from his book, "I went up to Elm Creek to attend a dance given by Mrs. Slack, an elder sister of Harriet Scoresby, and fell violently in love with her at first sight and determined to have her for my wife. The second time I met Harriet, I was driving a herd of cattle from the range into Kansas. Her father, her uncles, and all the other members of her family were bitterly opposed to Harriet marrying a wild cowpuncher. I made up my mind all the preachers in Kansas could not stop me. I talked to Harriet's brother-in-law, who lived in Barber County, Kansas, and he told me the whole family was opposed to me because people had heard exaggerated reports about me. I think this brother-in-law did a lot toward breaking down this opposition. and Harriet's mother, who was one of the greatest women I ever knew, was favorable toward me from the very start. Also, a young brother, O.C. Storesby, who was something of a wild kid himself, seemed to take a liking to me and often helped me out in meeting his sister, and that's the end of Chalres Colcord's quote. Well, Harriet and Charlie wed on February 9th, 1885, in the old Oklahoma country and remained so through flush and thin until his death a half-century later. When disease decimated the already scattered cattle of the Comanche Pool and sunk the Colcord family fortunes, Charlie and Harriet migrated west to Arizona, where he managed a ranch. His autobiography modestly recounts various amazing adventures, very modestly in his words. One of these included sliding while mounted to the precipice of a mountain cliff, the horse he was riding partially protruding over it before Charlie could bring them both out. Well, the Colcords returned to present-day Oklahoma for the 1889 unassigned lands run, which included present-day Stillwater, Kingfisher, Guthrie, Edmond, Oklahoma City, Moore, Norman, Mustang, Yukon, El Reno, and Purcell. Still brimming with restless energy and daring as he entered his 30s, it was the first of 3 land runs he rode in between 1889 and 1893. They netted him property in Hennessy, Oklahoma City, and Perry, where he also accepted a commission as United States Deputy Marshal and battled some of the most infamous outlaws in the Old West, including both the Doolins and the Daltons, and emerged with his life to tell about it. When Colcord's autobiography touches at all on such events, it does so with more modesty than others' accounts of his exploits. One notable scene he does recall is a shootout with a bullying saloon keeper, wherein Colcord acted in self-defense, had the quicker draw, and wounded the man. He also criticizes his friend and fellow lawman Heck Thomas for what Colcord considered the legendary Thomas's unnecessary killing of Bill Doolin in their famous shootout with the hole-in-the-wall gang outlaw leader. He believed Thomas should have made a greater effort to arrest Doolin. Darkness, wooded, and unfamiliar terrain, and the outlaw's competence in such situations likely influenced Heck Thomas otherwise. Then in 1898, the Colcords settled down in OKC. Now 42, thrifty and hardworking, Charlie rose quickly to leadership in the boisterous, fast-growing pioneer city, demonstrating competence in business and finance equal to what he had on the frontier. He founded one bank, served as vice president of another, was president of the Oklahoma City Building and Loan Association, and director of the Oklahoma State Fair Association. He developed numerous residential areas and helped spearhead establishment of the first meatpacking firm in the Oklahoma City stockyards, as well as construction of both the Commerce Exchange Building and the Swank Biltmore Hotel. The consummate businessman, entrepreneur, and visionary, Gwen? Seems as though Harriet Scoresby was wise in predicting him to become more than a wild cowpuncher and saloon gunfighter. And we haven't even gotten to his oil wildcatting exploits, nor his elder statesman role in epic 20th century dramas in the OKC.
Chalres Colcord, the man behind the name, is amazing. The golden nugget when we return. This is Oklahoma Gold. Dignifying our history when we learn the story behind the name. John J. Dwyer, Chalres Colcord?
That's right, he of Colcord Building and much other fame. Well, in 1901, daredevil wildcatter Robert Galbraith and others struck oil in the new Red Fork field, and Colcord was among their group that did that, 4 miles west of the Arkansas River, across from the creek-spawned village of Tulsa. Colcord shared his first-hand account of Oklahoma's first great oil boom. Quote, in the spring of 1901, the federal government sold at auction the town site of Red Fork, a new community on the Frisco line which was then building about 3 miles west of Tulsa. Years later, I heard stories of several fellows who drilled the first oil well in Red Fork, but for all these years, I have felt that we were the first to strike oil there, end quote. Well, Colcord, Galbraith, and Chesley suspected that much more oil lay south of Red Fork. 4 years later, they were hunting in the area when Charlie Colcord's 2 Kentucky wolfhounds lit out after a wolf. While searching for the dogs, the men found oil seeping in plain daylight from surface rocks on land 10 miles south of Tulsa, owned by Park Creek native Ida Glenn and her family. The Oklahomans secured a gaggle of leases from the Glenns in and around the area. They shrewdly plied their time until federal restrictions on drillers softened. Then they chose their spot, drilled nearly 1,500 feet down a very deep well for the era, and brought in the Ida Glenn #1 in late 1905, followed by numerous other wells. These comprised the famed Glen Pool field, one of the mightiest on record. In fact, it generated more revenue than the California Gold Rush and Colorado Silver Rush combined, and helped build the new state of Oklahoma, and Chalres Colcord was spearheading it the whole time. Well, Oklahoma's rough-hewn frontier ethos persisted well into the 20th century despite the building of skyscrapers, of which Colcord built the first, and major cities. The newly christened capital city of Oklahoma City hurtled to the brink of war in its streets during a 1911 streetcar strike, when out-of-state unions and their muscle encouraged streetcar workers disgruntled over wages and working conditions to strike. Former police chief, sheriff, and U.S. Marshal Colcord, taking command by experience, reputation, ability, and strength of character, stepped into the breach and put out an alert from his downtown office that rippled across the city and its surrounding environs. It called for trustworthy men to drop whatever they were doing and head downtown to his office immediately and to come armed. Colcord marshaled hundreds of them from the city's business and middle and upper class communities to confront the protesters. Meanwhile, not far away, a friend of yours and mine, Gwen, famed Oklahoma reformer Kate Barnard's stirring oratory inspired a crowd on a downtown street in favor of the strikers. But Colcord commanded more guns than his opponents and the steely willingness to use them. Then in 1918, he formed the North American Oil and Refining Company and served as its president. It was appointed to the National Petroleum Conservation Board by President Woodrow Wilson. Colcord's civic and historic deeds did not prevent him from the greater deed of loving his one wife, Harriet, for the half-century until his death, and siring and raising 6 children. He also served as president of the Oklahoma Historical Society and delivered a memorable speech to them in 1933, the year before his death, that constituted a virtual eyewitness account of the history of frontier Oklahoma. That same year, at age 74 and only months away from the end of his life, Chalres Colcord rose up one final time as guardian of Oklahoma. When his close friend and fellow oilman Charles Urschel was kidnapped at gunpoint from his OKC residence in a famous or infamous incident by George Machine Gun Kelly, one of the most notorious gangsters in American history, and held for ransom, Colcord called Oklahoma City's wealthiest men to his Colcord Building and collected an enormous amount of money, not for a ransom payment, but for a reward on the head of Machine Gun Kelly. The vicious gangster was soon captured. Charles Urschel returned unharmed, and Kelly sent to prison for life, where he died. Well, pearls of understanding and wisdom fill Colcord's autobiography, not least his crediting his career ascent to having made good on previous commitments to men of leadership and means, who thus gained the confidence in him to participate with or back him in future ventures. Upon his 1934 gathering to his fathers, full of years and honor, the Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce issued the following resolution, quote, "Affluence came to Chalres Colcord, but left unspoiled his native gentleness and simplicity. Always he was modest, humble, democratic, generous, just, and kind. He remembered the less fortunate friends of his early days," end quote. Well, Charlie Colcord's Fairlawn Cemetery tombstone in OKC yet sits quietly amidst the city and state he labored so well to build into something special. It reads appropriately, "His life was gentle, and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, 'This was a man.'"
Now that's Oklahoma gold.